Hello ladies and gentlemen, I am Destructicon and for this video I'll be reviewing EA's newest release, Anthem. This video will represent my initial impression of Anthem. I say this as with the rise of the games as a service model, it is important to periodically revisit such games to see if and how any core design, gameplay or technical issues are being addressed, and what new content is being worked on. As such, I'll revisit Anthem more closely at a later date to cover how the endgame is progressing, but I am confident with my initial assessment of the game thus far. With that being said, let's get into it. Anthem is a semi-open world sci-fi action FPS MMO hybrid from developer BioWare and publisher EA. The talented team from BioWare tries to take some of the lessons learned from Destiny and combine them with their own storytelling and grandiose vision of how such a game should look and play. In Anthem, you are dropped into the boots of a freelancer, an elite explorer pilot bounty hunter tasked with protecting a human colony on the planet of Bastion and averting possible disaster. You are introduced to the world and the various gameplay elements via story, and your initial progress will be closely guided by it. The first and most obvious departure from Destiny is the explorable map of Bastion, a vast, lush and epic alien world which beckons you on a journey of discovery. And while huge and explorable worlds are a mainstay of such games, Bastion distinguishes itself through sheer scope. Imposing mountains and cliffs flank the various subzones, crisscrossed by rivers and packed with dense and luxurious jungles, sometimes overshadowed by megalithic structures so vast they manage to put those of other games to shame. The only proper comparison I have for Anthem is with James Cameron's Avatar in terms of epic scope and gorgeous eye candy. While many areas are large and imposing, traversal doesn't feel slow and sluggish through them. On the contrary, it's actually incredibly fun and rewarding thanks to the smart and responsive flight controls of your suit. It also highlights an area of world design which is oftentimes ignored: verticality. Many feel flying ruins most open world games by making them feel small. Many MMOs are horizontally focused, with very limited flying, and oftentimes when flying is attempted, it isn't made full use of. Anthem is the living proof to the contrary. Flying enriches the experience by adding depth to the breadth of explorable area. The scope of it is also deceptive, as while areas are huge, they aren't empty. There are lots of nooks and crannies to explore which could lead to hidden underwater zones, caves or impressive superstructures, all potentially brimming with lore or enemy encounters. Thematically, Anthem also doesn't try to bombard you with futuristic gadgets, technology or visuals at every turn. The game world feels very organic and somewhat genuine. You are as likely to run into a vast stone city and ruins as you are to find a ramshack metallic pirate base. Unfortunately, my issue with the world is exactly this. It's just semi-open. To get to the hub area, you have to go through a loading screen. To get into missions, you have to go through more loading screens. To go back into the world, you have to go through yet another loading screen. This makes the vastness of the world feel disconnected from other aspects of the game and, in a few ways, quite isolated. It also doesn't help that the loading screens are also incredibly long, often stretching on for minutes. I've even had a friend reinstall Anthem on his SSD to get faster load times. And while this solution would be perfectly acceptable in 2025 or 2030, when we'll all have probably switched over to them, it's quite a terrible prospect in today's day and age. This disconnect is even more jarring when you look at the central hub of the game. The gracious and glorious mobility of the Javelin contrasts so sharply against the slowness of the hub that you're surprised it hasn't yet ripped the space-time continuum apart. The hub is so dull and uninteresting and so painfully slow. And more insultingly is the quote-unquote sprint functionality, which just so barely increases your mobility that your mind is constantly questioning it. When not exploring, you'll be encouraged by the story to go on missions and take on contracts. The missions at times feel like a series of scripted events, ranging from fetching certain objects to defending a location to routing the enemies. As in, not very interesting. In between, you'll also be treated with some in-game cinematics meant to advance the story. These cinematics themselves are top-notch in almost every aspect, with good voice acting, visuals, and exquisite body and facial animations. The various story or world missions and contracts will award your character with experience, based on your performance, as well as an assortment of loot based on the difficulty of the mission and your level and the javelin you're playing on. Around midway into leveling, you also unlocked strongholds, Strongholds are Anthem's version of dungeons, long scripted and much harder missions, which also have a large towering boss in the end. I won't get too much into detail on them as I'm more interested in how they play out at max level, but so far Strongholds do one thing right. They encourage you to cooperate more closely with other players, chaining combos to do damage, supporting each other with defenses, and reviving fallen comrades. The biggest downsides to Strongholds are the boring boss battles at the end though. Bosses are just enormous targets, waiting to sponge up ridiculous quantities of damage unloaded into their weak points. It feels like a huge missed opportunity. There isn't anything which encourages you in any particular way to use Anthem's unique controls and arsenal. The bosses don't challenge you to go into the air to make use of any particular mechanic or threaten you while you're up there. The exploration, visuals, level traversal, and combat itself is fun enough to avert tedium, at least initially, but there is a real risk that it could become stale in a few tens of hours more into the game. And once more, the lack of a true open world and the loading screens just make Anthem feel somewhat broken and disjointed, like a character suffering from split personality disorder. It also hurts that the open world, which while vast, gorgeous, and densely packed, still manages to feel hollow. You do find random encounters and combat a variety of foes, which reward you in victory, but the lack of any random quests, NPCs in the world, bosses, or even treasure maps just detracts so much from what would otherwise be a complete package. Speaking of combat, this is also one of Anthem's strong points, and it comes from a combination of the game's various systems. First, we have the weapons, and unfortunately, my experience with them has been the most underwhelming. Maybe it's just at the level that I haven't encountered any weapon which really stands out, apart from a sniper which shoots explosive rounds, but this could change at a later point. Next, you have your combat powers, which vary from javelin to javelin and range from protective barriers to mortar and heavy weapons fire to elemental blasts. A lot of these offensive tools can also apply status effects, such as igniting enemies on fire, drenching them in acid, electrocuting, or freezing them. The cool part is that these can be combined and triggered, either by you or another teammate. These combos deal large amounts of damage, are flashy and incredibly satisfying to pull off. Lastly, each javelin also has an ultimate ability, which is filled after participating in combat via kills and supporting allies. All of them are damage-focused, unique and stylish, really emphasizing the difference between the javelins. It's not only the ultimates which distinguish them though. The javelins, your mechanized combat suits, are fully fleshed out character archetypes which move, fight and play so differently that they feel truly unique. Colossus, for example, from the onset it's clear that he's the tank javelin, with each aspect of him designed to reinforce this. His mobility is the most limited, but he has by far the highest armor pull, making him the tankiest. Heck, he doesn't even have a dash, instead he pulls out a shield to block attacks and face the enemy. His shield is also another distinguishing aspect. For the other javelins, it's always on. Colossus instead can choose when to use it or not, allowing it to recharge against small arms fire but able to pull it out to block the big and dangerous strikes. Colossus can also use his shield offensively, either combining it with his sprint to knock down opponents or bash it into opponents' face to rock them off balance. His weapons are the most brutish and explosive, but also some of the most satisfying for fans of Hulkbusters or Michael Bay-esque explosions. Interceptor is almost the polar opposite to Colossus, having one of the lowest HP and shield pools, but compensated by some of the largest mobility. Visually, he has a sleek and agile frame, which lends itself perfectly to triple jumping, dashing and meleeing. Interceptor is the only javelin with no interruption in his melee animation, making him play somewhat like a robotic ninja. His gameplay is intoxicatingly fast, bordering on addictive, darting into the fray to execute an enemy opponent while jumping, dashing and gliding around the battlefield evading enemies. His gameplay is high risk but high reward. Storm is what most people would call a spellcaster, and others a glass cannon, focused on dealing devastating elemental damage and creating elemental barriers to help him and his team. His stature is proud and almost regal, so much so that he doesn't even run like most javelins. He glides in a manner akin almost to a Sith Lord. Even his defensive move is unique, with him not dashing but phasing out of existence entirely to evade damage. Ranger is probably the most stock option of them all. A balanced javelin with an assortment of defensive or offensive powers to choose from, making him extremely versatile in his simplicity. When all these elements come together, Anthem truly shines. Its combat akin to poetry, except written in bullets and energy lances. Your moves part of an intricate and deadly dance. Your javelins are also extremely customizable in a variety of ways. Each weapon and non-ultimate power can be swapped out by equipping various pieces of gear. The gear also comes in various rarities, which not only influence its power level, but also the number of special affixes on each piece of gear, such as plus damage to melee, larger shields, bigger explosions, etc. As such, it's quite possible to have two javelins playing entirely different styles. You could, for example, have an interceptor focused on melee archetype, getting all the gear focused on doing physical damage and surviving, while another interceptor could focus on snipers and use his mobility to get superior flanks and evade danger. It's almost like a hero shooter, but where you get to build a kit yourself. And it's not only the loadouts which can be customized. The visuals of your javelin can be intricately tweaked to your most exigent of desires, such that you can create a truly unique look. You get to choose the part model in each slot. You can customize the wear of your mech to go for a battle-hardened, worn look or a pristine factory line unit. The javelins also allow up to 6 coats of paint to be applied to the various parts of their frame, as well as the materials those should be made out of. If you're a fan of bling, perhaps you'll want to deck out your javelin with a chroma finish, or maybe you want to go for a regaler look with some fine leather and fabrics. When everything comes together, Anthem has something for everybody. It's a pity then that at least at this moment, Anthem is falling apart. So far, my experience of Anthem has been marred by a plethora of technical difficulties. I've encountered game crashes, the audio cutting out, and even had my campaign semi-crash, leaving me stuck in a near-infinite loading screen. Maybe worst of all, I encountered a few bugged world events and couldn't loot my reward from completing them, a cardinal sin in loot-based games. It appears the game is just not very well optimized. A friend of mine has encountered frame drops going below 40 FPS while flying casually in the open world, with it dropping even lower in combat. His PC, while not top-end, did meet the game's requirements. I also have encountered such frame drops and lag in very heated combat situations, and my PC does exceed the recommendations. While I am aware that these issues will be fixed in time, it's still an incredibly huge slap in the face to the people who have purchased the Premier Edition of the game and Origin access to play it early. These are Anthem's most hyped and eager audience. Everything should have been done to roll out the red carpet for them and make sure it's not pulled out from under their feet. There is also another issue I've scratched the surface of, which worries me. Due to the isolated nature of the world and the lack of any real organic dynamism, the game seems to be leaning towards being boring to play alone. The most fun I've gotten out of the game so far has been when I was able to cobble together 3 friends with no game crashes for 5 hours. This also has the effect of revealing that, at its most basic level, Anthem doesn't really innovate the MMO genre. You still have the same tried and tested formula of starting from a low level, encouraged and guided by the campaign to level up, increasing in power as you level, until finally you get to the late game where you stop leveling and instead start grinding for better gear in dungeons, hopefully with friends ad infinitum. This, in and of itself, might not be so bad if the execution was brilliant, but so far it isn't. Anthem just suffers from huge cognitive dissonance between its systems. If your primary way to progress in the late game is by doing strongholds and raids, then what's the point of an open world? If you're going to go through all this trouble to build such a brilliant planet, then you need to somehow make it remain relevant for months and perhaps years to come, and so far Anthem doesn't. Also, if your entire gameplay loop in the end revolves around strongholds and raids, then what's the point of having any campaign at all? It's 2019 already, people don't need a campaign just for a campaign's sake, and if you're going to build a story, you need to make it stand on its own 2 feet. But so far, Anthem can't accomplish this, and it's jarring considering it was developed by BioWare. The story so far, without any spoilers, seems to boil down into a basic good versus evil arc, with neither the protagonist or villain being in any particular way interesting. Gone are the huge dialogue choices, the witty and lively responses, and the interesting characters and consequences that came with them. Also, what's the point of leveling if it's only relevant for the first 30 hours of the game? Lastly, no discussion about the game would be complete without a pass on the monetization and fairness. Anthem can be bought for $60 or Euro, depending on the region, and releases on the 22nd of February. It can be accessed earlier by buying a more expensive version, or it can be accessed if you purchase the Origin Premium Access. Personally, I'm against the practice of pricing a certain version of the game higher just for an earlier and potentially more buggy release. It kind of feels like play testing on your own dime. I do appreciate the choice between buying it at full price or accessing the game via subscription, and this is my recommended way of trying the game, as you also get access to the Origin Vault. An incredibly sweet bang for your buck deal. So, this is a full price game, but it contains microtransactions. The good part is that I haven't yet found these to be predatory or pay to win. Everything you can purchase is visual only, and so far nothing is purchasable only via real money. The rate at which you earn in-game gold is pretty quick, and there are lots of daily, weekly or monthly challenges in-game to help you do this. Thus, to my surprise, this is another thing Anthem does right. In its current state, the only justifiable score I could give Anthem is a disappointing 6 out of 10. While the game is beautiful, sounds great and plays brilliantly, it doesn't really bring any innovation. It suffers from not wholly integrating all the systems, and it's packed with technical issues. It's a shame, as I did fall in love with the game's combat and world, but I just don't have anything to do in it. In a few weeks' time, the world threatens to be empty by design. If I want to right this ship, it isn't only the bugs they need to worry about. They need to work hard on integrating the world more into the design of the game, to give you a reason to be out in it at all times, to explore and to be excited about what you can find in it. I hope you've enjoyed my review of Anthem. If you have, please consider liking it, subscribing, leaving a comment and sharing it. I do my best to produce new content weekly. You can also catch me streaming on twitch.tv/Destructicon and find some of my work on Team Liquid, where I provide coverage for StarCraft 2. For this week, I'd like to give a shout out to Twist77 for supplying me with his PC specs and helping me organize my thoughts, as well as all my friends and Team Liquid for being awesome and supportive with feedback. Thank you all for watching, and I hope you have a great day.